We're going to look at the circulatory system in this video. Okay, so on the left hand side we've got a picture of the heart, which we'll come into and look at that in more detail. At the moment, let's just look at this picture here on the right. Okay, so what we've got here is we've got the heart at the center, and these when it's in red, that means we are talking about oxygenated blood, and when it's blue, that's deoxygenated. Okay, so this one's got a lot of CO2 dissolved in it. Okay, right, so let's start off blood on the right hand side of the heart here. Sorry, it's all right, but it's called the left because biological diagrams are always drawn the other way around by convention. Okay, so blood is pumped from this chamber of the heart here, which is called the ventricle, and it's pumped up through this out of the heart, and this is the main artery of the body, and it's called the aorta. Okay, it's big, right. And then blood goes down the aorta towards the tissues. Now branches will come off the aorta to your arms, your legs, your liver, and so on. I've just drawn one branch here. Now eventually the artery breaks into smaller and smaller subdivisions called arterioles, and they eventually become smaller and smaller and smaller until they become just big enough for one red blood cell to come through, and they're called capillaries. So very, very small blood vessels. And what can happen then is when you reach the capillaries, the blood is in very close proximity to the tissues, and oxygen can diffuse out of the blood. Okay, so oxygen is going to diffuse out of the blood down the concentration gradient. There'll be low concentration of oxygen in the tissues because the tissue has been respiring. So the tissue is using up glucose. Sorry, tissues are using up glucose, reacting that with oxygen, balance it, to form carbon dioxide and water. That, of course, is called respiration. So oxygen will diffuse out of the blood, and also glucose will also diffuse out of the blood to provide the tissues with energy. That will also go down the concentration gradient. And in the reverse direction, you're going to get carbon dioxide diffusing from the tissues into the blood here. Okay, so that's why I've not halfway through that I've drawn the blood being deoxygenated, and it's blue. It's low in oxygen. This will then return in blood vessels which are called veins. So they're not arteries, they're veins. They return blood to the heart, and the vein, eventually, this is called the Vena Cava, which is the biggest vein in the body. All the veins collect together, and they put the blood back into the right hand side of the heart here. This is called the right atrium. The atrium then pumps it back down into the right ventricle, and then that blood is pumped up into this blood vessel here, which is called the pulmonary artery. That goes to the lungs. So here we've got the lungs, and as happened with the other tissues, this pulmonary artery, which is carrying deoxygenated blood, in blue, breaks into smaller and smaller arterioles, and eventually into capillaries, which are in close association with the alveoli and the air in the lungs. And what happens then is carbon dioxide is going to diffuse out, this time, down the concentration gradient, out of the capillaries into the alveoli, and then of course that will be expelled when you breathe out. And at the same time, oxygen is diffusing into the blood from the alveoli, from the air, and making the blood oxygenated. And this blood is then returned by this blood vessel here, which is called the pulmonary vein. and that will go back into the left-hand side of the heart, and then it can begin its journey back round through the aorta to the other tissues, and that's completed the cycle. Okay, so that's what's meant by a double circulatory system. Okay, so what happens is, in a double circulatory system, you have two circulations, one for the lungs, where it picks up oxygen and gets rid of carbon dioxide, C2O out, CO2 out, and the tissues, where you get the exact opposite. The tissues, it's oxygen is out and CO2 comes into the blood. And also other nutrients, as I said, glucose will leave the tissues. Okay, so let's have a closer look at the heart now then. Okay, so here's the heart, and we can see there are, again, it's reversed so that the right hand is our left and vice versa. And you can see then blue for deoxygenated, red for oxygenated blood again. Okay, let's start off with blood entering the heart, and this, so this would be this here is the Vena Cava, which is the main vein in the body. Okay, so blood is going to go into, first of all, into here, and this chamber here is called the right atrium. The atrium contracts, and the blood is pushed into this chamber here, which is called the right ventricle. It's kind of V-shaped, V for ventricle. Okay, and then the blood from then after the atrium is contracted, the right ventricle contracts, and that pushes the blood up here into this blood vessel, which is going to go to it's an artery, and it's going to go to the lungs. It's the pulmonary artery. Just want to point out a couple of things here. Well, if you look around, there's these two flat things here which are held with strings, and if you do a heart dissection, you can see those sort of strings are called tendons. That is a valve, and that is to stop the blood. It only allows the blood to flow in one direction, and the direction it allows it to flow is from the atrium into the ventricle. Okay, so when the ventricle contracts, you want all the blood to go up into the pulmonary artery. You don't want it to go back into the atrium, and the valve stops that happening. And there's also another valve there, which once blood has gone into the pulmonary artery and the ventricle's relaxed, it stops the blood going backwards into the ventricle. So the valves are very important in order to maintain the flow of blood. And you may have heard, you know, if something goes wrong with the valves, a person gets very ill, and the valves have to be repaired. Okay, you get mixing of deoxygenated and oxygenated blood. Right, so the blood then continues its journey up through the lungs, picks up oxygen, gets rid of the CO2, and it comes back in here. And this is the pulmonary vein. And that puts the blood into this chamber here, which is called the left atrium. And the same thing happens on the other side of the heart. Then the left atrium contracts, and the blood is pushed through there. And it's only one way because of you've got those the valve there and it goes into this, which is called the left ventricle. And I've tried to show the left ventricle. If you look at the thickness of the muscular wall here, I'll try to show that it's a bit thicker, and it's got to be thicker because this left ventricle is then going to pump the blood up through here, and this is of course the aorta, the biggest artery in the body, and so it's got to pump the blood not just up to the lungs but round the whole the rest of the body. So that's why the left ventricle is more of a muscular wall than the right ventricle. And if you do a heart dissection, you can usually notice that. Right, again, you've got valves here to stop blood going back into the atrium when the ventricle contracts, is make it all go into the aorta. And you've got a valve here to stop backflow of blood from the aorta back into the ventricle after the ventricles contract. what happens when your heart beats is you hear a double beat, and the first beat is the atria, both the left and the right atria contract in unison, and the second beat is when the two ventricles contract together in unison. Just talk about something else which is found in the right atrium. Okay, in the right atrium, there is a group of cells, actually down here, called a pacemaker. Right, and the pacemaker controls how fast your heart beats. Okay, so it gives it a steady beat, which is about 70 beats per second, but then it's under control of nerves. So when you are exercising, it can make the pacemaker fire more rapidly, so the heart beats more quickly, or when you're asleep and resting, it makes the heart, it slows down the activity of the pacemaker cells, and so the heart beats at a slower rate. Once again, there are some diseases where something goes wrong with the pacemaker, and people have to be fitted with, and so it doesn't fire properly, and so the people have to be fitted with an artificial device to start the heart, to control the rate of heartbeat.